Hello everyone, I think we are just waiting for a few more people to join, so we'll get started in a minute or so. Okay, I think we have quite a few people joining, so hello everyone, thank you for joining our webinar today. My name is Holly, I manage the Aurelius Foundation. I hope you've all been keeping well during this period of lockdown. We've got a number of people joining us today from different parts of the world, so thank you for joining. And we're really grateful for your interest and your support around the foundation. So in a moment, I will hand over to Justin Stead and Dr. John Sellers, who will be discussing Stoicism during the lockdown. We'll also be joined by Professor Chris Gill from Exeter University. There will be a question and answer session at the end of the webinar, so please use the Q&A function to submit any questions at any time during the webinar. The Q&A button should be on your toolbar on Zoom. We will do our best to get through as many questions as we can, but if we don't get through them all, apologies, we'll do our best. We will not be using the chat or the raise your hand functions today, just the Q&A function. So this is the first webinar we've hosted, so please bear with us. We'd love to hear your feedback afterwards. So please feel free to email info@aureliusfoundation.com or engage with us on our social platforms. We're on Instagram, Twitter and LinkedIn. Anyway, I think that's enough from me. So over to Justin Stead, founder of the Aurelius Foundation.
Okay, thank you, Holly. Welcome, everyone. We're very pleased to have this webinar and execute it this afternoon. And we're very pleased to have multiple people from all over the world joining us for this first of our webinars. This is certainly unprecedented times. We're all going through various challenges and working through this set of scenarios that I think in three broad brushes we'll be working through the blunt trauma that we're in right now, stabilizing over the next months, and then returning to some type of new normal or normal in the early part of next year or through next year. So once again, thanks for joining us this afternoon. This is the first of a webinar that will be evolving over time. Wanted to thank everyone as well for attending, those that could, the inaugural event that we launched on March 6th in London. We were very pleased with that event, and we were particularly surprised at the follow-up and feedback of everyone that attended the event and the momentum and the energy that built very, very well from that event. We were very grateful. It was a terrific day. The energy, the speakers, and the follow-up engagement has been really remarkable and very, very pleasing for us as the founders of the foundation. John is speaking primarily this afternoon. We're going to have various conversations that take place. We're very pleased to have Professor Christopher Gill with us as well. Just a couple other things to be aware of. We had an event that we were starting to gear behind in June at Oxford that John was leading, and the foundation would support. That event's been postponed for the short term, but there are still some great things coming up. We've been invited as a foundation to various academic universities in the United States to speak to the target audience. Those will become webinars. We've also been asked to speak at various London business forums and UK business forums. We're waiting to see how those things unfold. And we've also been asked to speak at the Global Stoic event and have an afternoon series of seminars for the Global Stoic event, Stoicon, in Toronto in October. That event is now going to transform now into a digital event. And we're also going down to Australia in the early part of next year. So all from the London event and the general momentum that's been built into the foundation, we've really been so pleased with the engagement. And this afternoon, we look to build from that as well. So we're going to start soon. We've got 7 subjects that we're going to cover this afternoon: examining judgments, thinking about value, focusing attention, understanding control, accepting reality, learning from challenges, and developing self-knowledge. The way we're going to format the afternoon is John will talk and introduce each section, have some commentary about it from a Stoic, an academic perspective, and then we'll go into a conversation around each of these topics. If you've got questions, as Holly mentioned, please gather them up and we'll put them into the Q&A at the end of the main agenda. You know, to give everyone confidence again and just awareness, we're very privileged to have both John and Christopher with us this afternoon. Again, Dr. John Sellers is a lecturer of philosophy at Royal Holloway, University of London, and a visiting fellow at King's College London, a member of the Wilson College of Oxford. You'll see a number of books that John has been publishing recently: The Art of Living, The Stoics on Nature and Functional Philosophy, Stoicism, Hellenistic Philosophy, and Lessons in Stoicism. I highly recommend those books. I keep them beside my bed all the time, and I think they bring a pragmatism and understanding to Stoicism, which is quite unique. John is also a founding member of Modern Stoicism and the group behind Stoic Week and Stoicon, which happens every year. Stoic Week will be again, I'd say, in this September, October, and we look forward as a foundation getting behind that. Professor Chris McGill is an emeritus professor of ancient thought at the University of Exeter. He had previous posts in classics at Yale, Bristol, and other universities around the world. He has various research fellowships: National Humanities Centre, Leverhulme Trust, Arts and Humanities Research Council UK. He's written a number of books on ancient ideas, personality, self, ancient psychology, ancient psychotherapy and ethics, Stoicism, including Marcus Aurelius and Plato. He is also a founding member of Modern Stoicism and with the group behind Stoic Week and Stoicon. I'm delighted to have them with me this afternoon. Needless to say, as we move forward into the agenda, COVID-19 has been unprecedented. It is very, very new to us all. One of the biggest dislocations and disruptions that we've seen in our lifetime. And it may be with us for some time to come, and it may come back in different periods in the future. So I think we're going to be adjusting to this type of disruption, possibly not only just now, but for the future as well. So without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to John. And the first of the subjects that we'll address this afternoon is examining our judgment. So John, over to you, please.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Justin. So as Justin was just saying, we've got 7 broad topics that I thought we could talk about this afternoon. And I hope that as we go through them, we'll see the way in which these topics all quite closely interlink with one another. And the first of the topics is the role of judgments. So hopefully you can all see this quotation from Marcus Aurelius. He says, if you suffer pain because of some external cause, what troubles you is not the thing, but your judgment about it. And it's in your power to wipe it out at once. And this idea is something that we see in the Roman Stoics, in Marcus Aurelius and in Epictetus. Really, really strong theme in Stoicism. This idea that it's our judgments, it's the way that we think about things that determines how we experience the world. It determines what we think is worth pursuing, what's worth avoiding, what we might expect from other people or certain situations. It will lead to the generation of emotional responses. So our judgments about certain things might lead us to be excited about certain things or disappointed about other things. Judgments colour and shape and affect all of our lives, every aspect of our lives. This is one of the big claims that we see the Stoics make. So if that's the case, it looks as if judgments are absolutely fundamental for shaping the quality of our lives. And so as a consequence, the Roman Stoics, Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius in particular, stress that we must pay attention to our judgments. This is absolutely fundamental. And yet, for the most part, many people will just very quickly make judgments almost without realizing that they're doing it. We'll make value judgments about certain situations, about certain people, for instance, so quickly we don't even know that we're doing it. So that we think that the value that we're ascribing to certain things is inherent in those situations, that certain situations are inherently bad, rather than realizing that, in fact, we've made a value judgment about a situation, and that's something that we've chosen to believe. So an idea that is quite common in modern cognitive psychotherapy, for instance, is already present in the ideas that we see in the Roman Stoics. The idea that we ought to try to create some space or some distance between what we experience and then the judgments that we make about it, so that it's possible for us to test those judgments. For Marcus Aurelius in particular, this is a really, really key idea. One of the consequences of this, of course, is that if our lives are shaped by our judgments, if these are shaping the way in which we experience the world, then because these judgments are things that we're making, they're ultimately things within our control, right? So we actually have a lot more control over the way in which we experience the world than we might initially think, if so much of our experience of the world is shaped by these judgments. So that's, in a nutshell, the first of our kind of topics that we wanted to have a chance to discuss this afternoon. So Justin, your thoughts on this?
John, what I wanted to explore was a couple of things. First, COVID-19 is out of our control, and its potential impact is so significant personally, on a personal level, for everyone's profession, their families, interactions, all sorts of negative implications. But I also think that what's going a little bit further, which you touched on there, is the interpretation. Is that the situation, because of the constant media overload and continual 24 cycle that all it is discussed, I think there's not only an understanding that it's potentially out of our control and managing through that, it's the interpretation. So are we interpreting the facts correctly based on the overload of the media? And we understand it is a catastrophic situation, but I keep wondering, as I'm seeing reactions in public and responses from politicians and being in the business community, that the interpretation, because of so much information, is all over the place. So I keep coming back from a Stoic standpoint to say, I do need to interpret the information as best I can, but I still have to make decisions within what I can control. And I think what you're emphasizing there is there are troubles. We do have to make balanced judgment of it, but it is still within our power to move forward in a productive and positive way. Is that, would you say that Aurelius would approach it that way? Because he's dealing with, in his time, I mean, he was dealing with fighting the Gauls, running an empire, people trying to assassinate him, dealing with the plague for various years, multiple catastrophic issues just around the corner. But all the way through, he was operating from his inner citadel. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's one place in particular where he says everything is judgment. All of these things that are happening to him, all these situations he finds himself in, the plague in particular, very resonant in the current circumstances. He says everything is judgment. I mean, another thing that we see in Marcus in particular is the use of what we might call physical descriptions, right? So the idea that you might look again at the things that you're experiencing, that you're encountering, and strip them back of all of the value and the significance that we attribute to things, and just try to analyze them in terms of their material components. That's a kind of a technique he uses quite often to gain some distance from his judgments. What we're really experiencing is matter in motion, matter that's constantly changing in various different configurations, and all of the significance and the value and the importance that we experience in our day-to-day lives is just laid over the top of that by us.
Yeah, very good.
And of course, one of the consequences of that is all of the negative reactions that we have to certain situations is laid over by us, and so that again is something that becomes something that we can control to an extent.
Yeah. Before we go on to the next subject or the next agenda item within this afternoon, Professor Gill, would you add to that? What would you color around that, Chris?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Can you by the way, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
And can you see me?
And I can see you.
Okay, all right, that's fine. I can hear you but not see you. So, but that's fine as long as we can go on like that. Yeah, I'm just thinking about the application to our current situation. So I think one thing that this distinction between what's within our control, what isn't within our control, what's up to us, what isn't. So I think what's challenging in the current situation is just the ability to focus on those things that we can actually do, that we can actually control and manage, and to focus on those, and not to think, because obviously we've had to find different kind of procedures that we have to learn all the time, different protocols, things we must do. We mustn't go close to people. We mustn't do this. We mustn't do that. So, but it's a way of saying, okay, I do that, and then I do the things that I'm wanting to do, the projects that I normally have. And I think the difficulty in a way is of concentrating on that, on those things, on just what you said before, just carrying on doing what you think is important to do, without constantly thinking, oh, well, I'm going to get ill, I'm going to get COVID, if I do this, all sorts of things could happen. It's just that ability to focus on the things that enable us to carry out our projects. That's quite difficult, but I think that is part of this process of looking at your judgments and determining what is up to you and what isn't up to you.
Yeah, no, very good summary. I think as part of the Foundation's mandate, where we want to be heavily involved in business going forward, with businesses that commit themselves to a Stoic mandate. And I think, as I'm responding through a number of my ventures at the moment, and the two things that we're keeping, there's three elements, two things that we're keeping at the top of our control focus, which is safe protecting our people, which is our team, safely protecting soon our customers, and then in combination, taking a focus from the business to make sure that we're an entity, a business, a brand, a set of brands that survive long term. And those three things must be going hand in hand, with a priority around the control of safety and what we need to do as a business going forward to make sure that we are complying with government regulations, going beyond those, and trying to make sure that the safety and the confidence in our businesses is there for our team and for customers, but also making sure that over the long term, the business is a sustainable entity. Okay, so let's go to number 2, and back to you, John, please. We're talking about thinking about value.
Yeah, sure. So another really foundational idea for the Stoics is thinking and reflecting about what has value, what's really genuinely inherently good and what isn't. And one of the signature ideas that we see in Stoicism is the idea that the only thing that's genuinely inherently good is having a good character, an excellent state of mind, possessing the virtues. There are a number of different ways we might describe what the Stoics are getting at. Mental health, you could even describe it as, but inflected with this ethical idea of embodying certain excellences of character. And the Stoics give us arguments for this. So the reason why they think that this is the only thing that genuinely has value is because this is the only thing that consistently benefits us, right? So if you've got good mental health, if you've got an excellent character, if you possess the virtues of courage, fortitude, moderation, and so on, there's never going to be a situation in which you find yourself where that's going to be detrimental, right? It's always going to be beneficial to have those things, no matter what. Whereas all sorts of other things that we might think of being good, whether it be fame, fortune, success, or whatever. There may be situations where those things actually don't benefit us quite so straightforwardly. So they give us a reason why we ought to think that that an excellent character is the only thing that has real value. There's no circumstances in which we won't be benefited by it. So again, a passage from Marcus Aurelius that hopefully people can see. If you discover in the life of man something higher than the virtues of justice, truth, temperance, fortitude, turn to it with all your heart and enjoy the supreme good now that you found it. But if nothing is higher is revealed, and of course Marcus thinks you're not going to find anything higher than those, give no room to anything else. Go out and look for the thing that you think is most valuable. And Marcus is quite insistent, you're not going to find anything more valuable than those virtues or character traits. Because, as I've said, those are the only things that will always benefit us, no matter how good or bad the circumstances we find ourselves in might be. So that really kind of sort of put this theme on the table.
I thought that this afternoon's agenda, this is one of the most important parts of the 7 topics that we'll discuss this afternoon. And the reason I rate this part of it so important is thinking about value is as follows. This is an overused phrase of COVID, but it is so unprecedented. And the lockdown of no one really has seen anything like this. Even with the major events around 9/11, obviously that was a huge dislocation, but it was relatively short-lived and life returned relatively quickly. From a financial perspective, the collapsing of the financial system, the financial crisis with Lloyd's here in London, etc. And all of that, how that played out. These were big dislocations, but they finished rather quickly and life somewhat returned and there was a clarity. We're in new territory here. And with this what I would call downtime to a degree, where yes, businesses are focusing desperately to stay alive and to access liquidity and all those things, individuals are reassessing their families in terms of engagement and how they operate day to day. And I think within both contexts, what you're seeing is this is really where the rubber meets the road. So in other words, this is a point for real reflection, reevaluation, and to your point, John, thinking about what is really valuable. What is really valuable? People have a different set of time. If you're a furloughed worker, employee across the country right now over the last 6 to 8 weeks, you've seen an opportunity where you've got time to think. Your normal lifestyle is completely disrupted. You are not doing the same things that you've become so accustomed to. Little luxuries have gone away. Big luxuries have gone away. It's different. So the Stoics would take an opportunity, I think, within this time frame to reassess, to reevaluate, to really take an internal view and say, what am I really going to value from this experience? And just as importantly, which I remain an optimist, what will society take out of this period? That there may be very positive changes in certain ways that we conduct ourselves as individuals, as communities, as society, because we've taken the time to think about what is really valuable. Professor Gill, would you weigh in, please?
Yeah, I think it's been very interesting, this period, the way in which people have shown how strongly they feel that particular message, that what really matters is expressing the virtues, is acting rightly, showing the virtues of wisdom, courage, self-control and justice. And we've had some really wonderful examples of that, not only in health workers who've gone back to, who go into work at great cost to themselves, people who raise money in extraordinary ways, but also ordinary people are showing that they too respond to this in this special situation by helping their neighbors, helping other people around them. because sometimes people say, oh, well, this Stoic idea, it's too extreme. You know, that isn't really, that's just, it's wrong to say that virtue is the basis of happiness. But when the chips are down, when the times are hard and the situation is right, people show that actually this is a conviction that they have. So I think the Stoics weren't wrong in highlighting this as an absolutely fundamental feature. And it's just that because things are so exposed in a way, that these truths become more apparent.
Yeah, I think that's you touch on something there very powerful to me, is even you've seen the great acts of kindness and sacrifice on a national level and local communities, but even close to home. My wonderful wife, I've been so amazed and impressed by her attention to the children during this time, the way she's protected some friends and doing acts of kindness for them and their response. I think it has brought out a side of humanity where you may not have seen that under different circumstances, but the overriding umbrella of what we sit under has, you know, propelled people to value things differently. And it also is not so much what I value, it can be often so much what the other person values. And we've seen that play out very, very powerfully. And every Thursday night at 8 o'clock that the country turns out in a symbolic way to acknowledge the sacrifice of the NHS, I think has been really, to me, very inspiring. But the little acts of kindness as well. And I think that comes back to thinking about the value of assessment during this time. And you see people complaining, you see other people not complaining, some people accepting the reality, something trying to work against it. You know, I have various management meetings throughout every day, and it is what it is. We are where we are. This situation will move on at the appropriate time. So there's no point thinking that it's going to change until it's ready to change and those steps have been taken. And this is a time to think harder about on a day-to-day process and a requirement around good character and the value of that good character.
I just check one other thing on this topic.
Go on, John.
So
Please.
One of the things that I've noticed that's been quite interesting in the sort of media discussions is a different way of thinking about good business and good companies. Suddenly we're seeing companies being assessed by how well they're treating their staff, how well they stand by their teams, not simply about how efficient or how profitable they are. Suddenly the idea that a company has done well by its staff at a time of crisis becomes a significant feature, and people aren't going to forget. And particularly staff aren't going to forget, right? The people that have been abandoned versus the people that have been looked after. Suddenly, the idea of virtue in running a company is sort of on the table in the way in which I've not really seen it before.
Yes, I can absolutely concur to that, because in the interests that I'm involved in and being in conference calls all the time with you know, peers and other CEOs and other chairs and what have you, you have seen a dramatic shift in most circumstances. The other thing that will translate through this whole entire situation is that sadly businesses will succumb to the effect of the virus. Some businesses that were close to, you know, they call them zombie businesses, won't make it through this set of scenarios. But I do think if you look across the piece, there is an assessment going on of business and the corporate citizenship responsibility that exists in those business, and not only for the customers and the engagement, but you're right, John, protecting the employees as best as they can. And not to be political in any persuasion, but I do give a high credit score to the UK government, the way they've reacted. They haven't been perfect. No, I don't think any government entity could. But in terms of stepping in behind the business community to protect employees, to protect employees, that translates into society, I can give them high marks as far as I'm concerned, and the boards that I'm involved with in terms of what they've done to try and support over that particular part of the response from the government. Okay, let's move forward then. Let's go to number 3. And back to you, John, on focusing attention.
Yeah, sure. So both of the two themes that we've touched on so far, we might characterize them as involving a shift of attention away from from external things, away from placing value on external possessions or certain situations, because these are things we can't control, and these are things that aren't inherently good, and a shift in our attention towards something internal in us, right? So a shift towards paying attention to the value judgments that we make, a shift towards trying to develop our character, to develop those virtuous character traits, right? And there's a kind of a feedback loop here between those two things, between the judgments that we make and the quality of our character, right? Our character shapes and determines the judgments that we make, and if we can get into a habit of making certain types of judgments, that in itself will help to shape and reform our character. Now, I think those connections connect with what I had in mind for this third theme, the idea of focusing attention. So again, hopefully you can all see this passage from Cicero. Cicero is not a Stoic, of course, but he presents lots of Stoic ideas for us, and here's one. So take the case of one whose task it is to shoot a spear or arrow straight at some target. One's ultimate aim is to do all in one's power to shoot straight, and the same applies with our ultimate goal. So this is a sort of very famous analogy that we see discussed amongst the Stoics. If the archer sets as his goal hitting the target, then he's often going to be frustrated and disappointed because that ultimate goal of hitting the target is out of his control, because no matter how well he shoots, a gust of wind could blow the arrow off target, right? So the Stoics suggest that instead, if we shift our focus of attention from hitting the target to simply shooting as well as we can, then we've got a goal that is potentially something within our power that we can completely master. We can shoot as well as it's possible to shoot, and that will of course enable us to hit the target more often, even though it won't be able to completely guarantee that we do all the time. And this is there's often an analogy drawn between that thought, the archery example, and say medicine, right? Which obviously is something that's in people's minds at the moment. So a doctor, for instance, no matter how good he or she may be, can never guarantee to save all of their patients because of various factors that are simply out of their control. So again, the doctor's aim ought to be, one might say, to do everything that they can within their power to exercise their medical expertise as best they can, whilst acknowledging that that's not always going to lead to the positive outcome that they might hope for. And so this effectively involves a shift from thinking about the end result to thinking about the process. So if we shift our attention from the final outcome or goal of whatever it is we're trying to do to the process, then we're much less likely to be frustrated. So what matters then becomes not so much whether we're successful or not in whatever it is we're trying to do, but in the quality of the actions that we undertake in whatever it is we're trying to do. It's the character, we might say that it's putting our character to work in those actions, right? Acting fairly, acting justly, consistently, courageously. If we can act in those ways, if we can act well, then we can feel confident and happy and content that we've done the best we could, no matter what the final outcome of particular events are. So I think this connects very well with the previous two themes. A shift in our focus of attention from the outcomes of what we're trying to achieve simply to the processes, and trying to do our actions as well as we can.
Yeah, very good. Chris, I'll go to you before I comment and weigh in here. Chris, what would you add to that from John's comments?
I don't know if I'd add anything. I think that it's so what is, someone might say, well, okay, so what is it doing? What is doing well? And I think you gave some examples of it. Acting well is acting wisely, or trying to, acting justly, acting with courage, acting with self-control and moderation. So it's exercising the virtues. That is what it means to do something well, or to try and do so. The Stoics stress that we're working towards this. Another way of thinking about that is to say we're trying to live the best possible human life. And you might, well, that's very general, you might say, but what is a human life? It's one in which we show rationality, but also one in which we relate properly to other people. So those two strands must go together all the time. So there are various ways I think the Stoics have for thinking about what this doing things well is. It's not just a vague idea, it's quite a precise one. And they define it in terms of the virtues, our objectives, what it is to live a human life, and also by examples of good ways of living, good people who exemplify these things. So that's a few more suggestions about John's point.
I think we're going to talk a little bit more about process in a moment. One of the things I think around the theme of focusing attention during a period like this, I think we mentioned it a little bit before around individuals having the time and the dislocation of normal activities to then stand back and think about value and understand what is truly valuable to someone as an individual and as a person. And that translates into their family and wider community. What's interesting, again, going back to a business side, is that there's an enormous percentage of businesses at the moment and over the next few months that their whole profit forecast will go to zero, effectively zero, and that everyone will be on the same playing field. Certain businesses will obviously flourish during COVID, but this is huge. As a percentage of business, it will be drastically affected, and their profits will be wiped out, and they'll be operating on cash flow, waiting for the world to return back to normal. Now, why I find that interesting is it comes back to the focus on what's important, value, and process. Because if 70% of businesses are going to be brought to a standstill, profits going to zero, but they will make it with support, injections of capital from shareholders or the government support, and they make it, they come back, but they're all starting from zero. And why that's quite significant, I think, is because then what does your business really stand for? If you're not making money at the moment, then you're going to try and return to making money as a business enterprise. But then you're going to have a reset moment that, what does my business stand for? Is it a good business? Does it support a proposition? Does it work into the community? And I look around at my competitive set and what have you, and we're all starting from zero profit. So then what do I really stand for? And what is the value of my business starting from zero? Because my competitor over there is starting from zero as well. So this is a reset button and a focus of attention and value creation that, again, in my business career, in my lifetime, I've not seen before. But whether it's personal or business, that assessment of value and how we go forward here and what that process looks like will be very, very interesting. Okay, let's go to number 4, which is understanding control, which is clearly highly relevant. So John, back to you, please.
Yeah, sure. So we've preempted ourselves a bit on this one already. Obviously, as I was saying at the beginning, all of these seems quite closely interconnected. So just following on from what we've been saying about focus, another reason why we might want to think about focusing on the process rather than the outcome, focus on how well we act rather than whether we're successful or not, is that how well we act, whether we act virtuously or not in a given situation, is something that's within our control. And the Stoics would argue that ultimately it's the only thing over which we have complete control. I mean, we can influence the outcome of all sorts of other things, but there's nothing that we have complete control over apart from how we judge things and then how we act based on those judgments. And of course, one of the central themes that we see the Roman Stoics in particular come up with again and again is that if we focus our attention on things that aren't within our control, such as the outcomes rather than the processes, then we're likely to be frustrated and disappointed and succumb to all sorts of negative emotions when things don't work out the way that we'd like them. And of course, they often won't work out the way we want them to, because that's just the way the world works. And we'll come back to that idea a bit in the next theme. So Epictetus sums this up very nicely in the passage that hopefully people can see. So some things are up to us, he says, and some things are not up to us. Our opinions are up to us, our judgments, that is, and the actions that we make based on our opinions and judgments. But our bodies, our possessions, our reputations, all of these things are not up to us. They're not within our control. And as a consequence, we ought not to attach too much value to those compared to the quality of how we act. And obviously, our bodies not being up to us is something highly relevant in the present context, right? None of us have control over whether we get sick or not. And that's something that's being really forcefully brought back home to everyone at the moment in the current situation. Everyone's suddenly very aware of this.
Yeah, I think this is a very, very important point around the control understanding, because I had someone ask me, I've had, both professionally and personally, quite a number of questions, and coming through the foundation as well, and basically saying, Justin, how do you operate during the lockdown period? And honestly, I said for half the answer was, I answer the same as I always do. The reason I emphasize that is around daily disciplines and rituals. One thing that I think the Stoics, and if you look at the lifestyle, as much as we can recognize and understand the lifestyle of a Roman emperor like Marcus Aurelius, or Epictetus, or Seneca, even particularly Seneca in some ways, these were creatures of habit. They approached their daily rituals, their daily disciplines, in a very similar way on a consistent basis, similar basis. So someone asked me recently, well, if you're trying to be a Stoic, what does that look like? And I said, okay, well, it doesn't change that much in terms of whether we're in lockdown or not. And what does that mean? What does that translate to? And I said, well, for me, it works like this. And this is just what it works for me as an aspiring Stoic is, I rise very early every day. The first thing I do is get a hot, glass of hot water and lime and lemon juice. And I sit at my home office and I clear out my overnight business, because I don't want to go forward until I've had that my piece of my mind cleared. So early rise, hot water and lime, clear my overnight business around the world. Then I go for a 2 or 3 mile walk. Then I'll meditate for 30 minutes. Then I'll have a coffee at 10 o'clock. I'll fast till lunchtime. I'm plant-based anyway, for the most part. I'll read Marcus at lunchtime. I'll finish my afternoon activities. And then I'll do a fairly significant physical workout late in the afternoon. Sometimes I'll do that in the morning. Then I have family time. Then I have, a light evening meal, and hopefully time with my wife by the time we get everything sorted out with our family. And then every night before I go to bed, I read Seneca. And I read at least one letter from Seneca to Vasilis from his famous letters. And I do that whether I'm in lockdown or not. So the reason I suggest that to people that have their daily rituals, whatever they are, that works for me. I'm not suggesting it works for anyone else. But day after day, habit after habit, that continues to reinforce. When the winds are breezy, it works. When the winds of life are very difficult, it still works. But either way, that foundation is underneath you. And I try to encourage the young people I talk to who are coming into Stoicism that you have to reinforce the habit a lot. You have to be thinking about it a lot. And John and Chris, one of the things you've continually taught me as I've engaged with you over the last periods is that Stoicism is very repeatable. You know, if you look at Marcus Aurelius' meditations, it's a repeat. He continually repeats. He clearly is on himself all the time about the areas of his life that he wants to improve on, that he believes that are not in sync with completely how he'd like to be as a Stoic. And I think during this process of lockdown, not only reestablishing your value, but what are your daily rituals? What are your disciplines? How do you go about conducting a life that is built on habit, and that not just physically and so on, or professionally, but are you in the gym consistently within your inner citadel and working on your character? And I think this period has provided me an opportunity to reinforce that as well. Professor Gill, would you add some color, please?
Well, one or two thoughts. Yes, I think Marcus wonderfully brings out one thing that's absolutely central to Stoicism is that we're all learning. We're all learning all the time. We're learning how to live better. This is the project. So that project doesn't go away and doesn't change. It doesn't change whether you're under lockdown, whether you're coming out of lockdown, whether you're just whether you're leading a normal life, whether you're incredibly stressed. You're still trying to live better. You're trying to master the steps and stages of living a better life. And that is just invariable. And of course, there can be many ways of doing that, and many patterns or structures of life that you can have. So there's no Stoic formula, I think, for living. But the main thing is that if you can shape your life so that you feel that it's not just going from one day to the next, going from 1 month to the next, but actually that you're using this rare gift that you have, this miraculous possession that we have of life, and using that, making it into something worthwhile, and trying to develop that. So that's what seems to me the Stoic project.
No, very good. John, anything you'd round out on that?
No, I think that's everything we need to, I'd want to say about control at this stage.
Yeah, okay, good. Let's move forward then. I do have a disclaimer there that what works for me or other people at the foundation, no one's advocating it works for anyone else. We believe in the principles of Stoicism and how an individual adapts to Stoicism and adopts the principles of. That is the main journey that we're advocating from a Stoic awareness. So the things that work for me or work for you, whatever, everyone has to take their own journey on that. But we're looking to open up the window of thinking as far as Stoicism is concerned. Okay, let's go to, we've got 3 more to cover. Let's go to number 5, accepting reality.
Yeah, so I think this follows on very nicely from what we've just been saying. This idea that if you focus attention on things that are out of your control, then you're likely to be frustrated and disappointed. That idea of things not working out the way we'd like them to do, I think, is an interesting one. And it's especially prominent in Marcus Aurelius. So this passage from the Meditations that hopefully people can see, I'll read through this. He says, of man's life, his time is a point, his existence a flux, his sensation clouded, his body's entire composition corruptible, his vital spirit an eddy of breath, his fortune hard to predict, his fame uncertain. Briefly, all the things of the body a river, all the things of the spirit a dream and delirium, his life a warfare and a sojourn in a strange land, is after fame, oblivion. I think this is one of the really striking passages in the Meditations, but the basic idea crops up again and again, as many of you will know. It's basically the idea that we are not, it turns out, the center of the universe. The world doesn't revolve around us. It often doesn't conform to our will. We're finite beings, minuscule when we compare ourselves against the immensity of space and time. Just one amongst the almost 8 billion people currently alive on the planet. In the larger scheme of things, none of us are in fact that important. And so why on earth might we feel entitled to complain when the universe doesn't conform to our wishes? Why on earth would the universe conform to our wishes, given how small and insignificant individually we are? And I think that that's a real kind of wake-up call for many people. It's very easy to fall into an obsessive focus on our first-person perspective, our own cares, concerns, hopes, and so on, and kind of want the world to conform to our wishes. And again, for someone like Marcus Aurelius, who as emperor would have been admired, he would have had all sorts of sycophants coming up, praising him, telling him he's the most powerful person in the Western world. The fact that he's continually reminding himself of his insignificance, I think, is really striking. And in the present context, I think as well, one of the things that I've seen various commentators notice is the kind of wake-up call that the virus has given, that for a while human beings seem to have thought that they'd managed to completely tame nature. Nature was suddenly completely under our control and we could do whatever we want. And what this tiny, tiny little virus that none of us can even see has shown us that in fact nature is very much in control and we don't have the power and autonomy that we thought we had. And I think that's one, again, really quite striking thing that people have started to reflect on over the last couple of months.
Yes, very good. Professor Gill, your thoughts on accepting the reality and working through it based on John's comments?
There's a huge amount here, isn't there? Accepting reality. One aspect of this is perhaps thinking about the implications for climate change. We're talking about nature, our place in nature, what we can control, what we can't control. I think this period of lockdown has changed people's behavior enormously. They have responded, in fact, to a new reality, to the reality of greater risk of a disease. But there is another reality, which is more threatening, which is that of climate change. And there's a huge need for us also to respond to that reality and to be aware of that. And that is, to some extent, although there's a great deal we can't control, as John reminds us, there are some things we can control. We can control our own actions and as a society and as a state, as a political entity, we can control the way we use energy and the way we generate emissions and so forth. So I think that as we become aware of realities, we need to use this moment, this moment of change, to think about how we should adapt to nature and to our place in nature in the future. So I think this does give us a real opportunity to think more about the reality around us and how we should treat it, how we should respond to it.
Yeah, I think the data that's going to come from this period where economic activity has been so dramatically reduced, and the early pass across China and some of the data that came out of that period where the environment responded very positively to a lack of economic activity and emissions and so forth. I think that is going to be very interesting to see the analysis, the full impact from a global basis over the next periods, months, years of what this period of slowdown, and making the assumption that it is a positive for the environment. And therefore, what is the requirement from an individual standpoint, from a community, from a national community, from a business community? What are these communities going to do to say that, look, there was a positive reaction to nature from a very negative and dislocation in the business community or in global activity? And there is a point where those two variables are coming together very aggressively, and everyone is, for the most part, very concerned about the impact on the environment, and where we're heading in that direction. I think I'd comment on two fronts. I think a generation has been interesting to observe generational understanding of this situation, and again, accepting the reality. Whereas, and I put that in the context of saying at a certain generation have possibly been through more difficult, or not similar, but setbacks, and particularly the older generation who went through the impact of whether it was World War II or Vietnam or other dislocations of a certain nature that weren't as completely widespread, although World War II was. But those generations tend to look at this a bit differently. Now, for the first time, you're seeing a younger generation that whole plans, graduations, university placements, jobs starting, all of these things are now all of a sudden, completely out of the planned on, but completely now halted, and in some cases gone away. And it's been difficult. But when I'm mentoring those people, I'm simply saying you have to look at the whole grand context of how your life will shape out. This is a period that may have some dramatic impact over a short term. And what does short term mean? For some people, that's short term can be a year. Now, we don't know the full impact and how this will play out, but that impact is going to be there. But the message then is also that you will be resilient. You will get through this. Your plans may change. Your opportunities may move differently. But in the grand scheme of things, you will play your part, and you will proceed. And if your attitude is right, if you're taking on board the hardship and you're realigning accordingly, you'll be absolutely fine. From the business community, it's a real reckoning. And I've touched on some of these in my comments before. It's a rinsing out period. It's a cleansing period. It's a repositioning period. It's an assessment period. There's all sorts of adjustments coming through the business community. And I think, John, your comment before, businesses will be judged both from a perception and ethical and moral standpoint of how they have conducted themselves as a corporate citizen within the greater good. And you've seen outstanding examples of that. And you've seen some interesting ones as well. So either way, the reality is the reality, and there is no avoiding that. So we have a mantra in our family, and we have a mantra in the businesses that I'm involved in. Lean in, because there's no point leaning back, because the reality is the reality. This situation is here. You may as well be part of the solution and working through it versus pulling the reins and getting back, because that's just going to be frustrating and a waste of energy. Okay, we're almost there with two topics to go, or two areas we just like to cover from a Stoic perspective. Number 6, John, learning from challenges.
Yes, so again, this one I think highly relevant to the current situation. This is one of my favorite, very, very short quotes from Seneca. Disaster is virtue's opportunity, he says, in his essay on Providence, where he elaborates on this theme at a lot greater detail. So as we've been saying, things sometimes don't go the way we'd like them to go. And we ought not to be surprised by that fact. Now, Seneca in particular argues very forcefully that this is in no way a bad thing. And in fact, in some ways, it may well be beneficial for us. And his line of thought goes like this. So if everything goes your own way all of the time, then it's very easy to become very complacent and self-satisfied. We don't have to work quite so hard for the outcomes that we want. And if things keep going very well for us, then after a time, we'll come to expect that things will keep going well for us. And if that's the case, if things just come easy, then we'll stop to appreciate the very good fortune that we have. It'll make us ungrateful. And then on occasions when things don't go the way that we'd like them to go, we'll be all the more susceptible to frustration and anger, and effectively end up acting like slightly spoiled children. By contrast, when things are tough, when we face disaster, as Seneca puts it, we have to learn. We have to learn to be resilient. We have to be resourceful. We might have to be courageous. We have to show those virtues. We find ourselves in testing situations where we need to develop those virtues if we don't already have them. So when times are difficult, this is when we really get the chance to develop precisely the thing that the Stoics say is the only thing that's genuinely good. We get to develop those character traits. We don't learn that much from success, Seneca insists, but we always learn a lot from failure. It's when things don't go well that we get those really strong life lessons. And we also learn how to appreciate success when it does come. The more failure you've had first, the more you'll appreciate the good times and show appropriate gratitude for them. And I think in the present context, we touched on this a little bit earlier on, but think of all of those impressive examples of virtuous behavior, social behavior that we've seen over the last couple of months, whether it be the heroism of people working in hospitals, for instance, the small acts of kindness where people have been helping out neighbours or elderly relatives, delivering groceries or whatever it might be, the weekly nights of applause that Justin mentioned earlier, the Major Tom in the UK and his fundraising. We've seen all sorts of expressions of good, positive, virtuous behaviour that this very bad situation has brought out of people. And those are some significant positives. There's almost a sense in which there's a kind of a restoration in the faith of humanity in some respects. And these are things, not to be ignored.
I think, look, a brilliant overview. And I think this is really a theme that runs through the Stoic thought process. And I think Seneca in particular, because the details of Seneca's life and what happened to him and how it happened and where he ended up with the situation with his relationship with Nero and what have you, it wasn't easy, to say the least. But he was someone who was born into privilege. So, he had a very interesting set of, almost dichotomy of his life and how it unfolded. And he had to walk the walk. And from all accounts, he seemed to. I think on the March 6th event here in London, we heard from a Wimbledon champion. And the great man, Pat Cash, shared his journey and his walk along the Stoic thought process that he was doing naturally, but then as he became more aware of Stoicism and how he kept leaning into that situation. I think Pat's interesting from his career and as a fellow founder of the foundation, his wisdom and experience is highly relevant in this particular area because, he played 13 years as one of the greatest tennis players of his generation, top 10, all of these accolades, etc. But for an extensive period of that time of 13 years on the tour, he was injured. He couldn't play the game that he was one of the best in the world at. And he had to keep coming back from these, at times, seemingly career-ending opportunities. But instead, he used it as an opportunity. He reinvented his body from time to time, certain parts of his body, so he could compete again. And I think I heard someone say to me in the last 6 months that when you really want to meet Seneca, Aurelius, Epictetus at the front door, you need to have a disaster. If you want to meet them and understand them best, you need to have a disaster in your life, which I think is a little bit extreme. And I don't wish that on anyone, particularly myself. But I think that this period and what is transpiring, you're seeing incredible amounts of creativity, new ways of doing things, great acts of kindness, all sorts of different things coming out of, what is a disaster on many fronts. Professor Gill, what would you add there?
A couple of things. One is that Stoicism can also help you in success. Some people find it even more difficult to live well in success. Success, it goes to their head. They lose their bearings. They lose any sense of perspective or moral compass. So I think we shouldn't just think that Stoicism is helpful to you when things are going badly, though it can be wonderfully helpful in those ways, the way that you've described. I think the other thing is that at the moment we have a kind of single shared problem, the problem of COVID and how to respond to it. But of course, we all have problems. There are all losses and difficulties. There are gaps in people's lives, people who've died and are no longer there, absences, or people who are there and they're very difficult to us. So these things are always present, either individually or collectively. And again, Stoicism can be wonderful in the way it does give this resource for us to deal with these, help us deal with these things.
No, very good. Which kind of touches on into our last agenda point, which John will lead into, which is developing self-knowledge.
Yeah, sure. So one central idea in Stoic ethics is the idea that we live in harmony with nature, or that we live consistently with nature. And it looks as if they intended this idea in a number of different ways. So one way in which they thought about living in harmony with nature was the idea of living in harmony with the natural world, with nature with a capital N, we might say, which connects to some of the ideas that we've already been talking about. So accepting things that happen according to the order of nature, we might say. So that's one idea in which we need to simply accept nature. There's also the idea of living in harmony with human nature. So this would pick up the idea that humans are rational beings, they're also social beings. And so to live in harmony with human nature would involve cultivating the sorts of virtues that we've been talking about already, right? But another aspect of this idea of living in harmony with nature that again Cicero reports for us, which I think is really interesting, is the idea of living in harmony with our own unique, specific nature, right? So we've all got our own specific natures, we've all got our own peculiar character traits, our own preferences. Some of us might be natural extroverts, others might be introverts. Some of us might be naturally sporty, others might be naturally artistic. We've all got these different peculiarities that are part of our own inner nature that we've not chosen, we've just found that that's who we are. And this idea that Seneca brings out is that we need to take the time to develop self-knowledge so that we can find out who we are. And so that when we try to embrace this idea of living in harmony with nature, we're not just thinking about these large abstract things like nature as a whole or human nature, but we're also thinking about our own nature. And gaining that self-knowledge looks like it's absolutely key for thinking about our place within the world and where we fit and where we belong. What career might be the most appropriate one for us? What social situations are we going to feel comfortable in? That sort of thing. So again, I'll just quickly read the passage from Cicero that I hope everyone can see. So he says, each person should hold on to what is peculiar to him. We must act in such a way that we attempt nothing contrary to universal nature, but while conserving that, let us follow our own nature. You cannot preserve that if you copy someone else's nature and ignore your own. So in effect, he's saying, don't simply follow the crowd, engage in some reflection so that you can start to get a sense of who you are. And I think that that's a really interesting and important idea that the Stoics are also suggesting that we do, and particularly for younger people just starting off in life, trying to find their place in the world, to have some space and some time to engage in that kind of reflection, I think is is something really important. I mean, there was an interesting news story relevant to this a few days ago, saying that there's been a huge reduction in drug-related crime in inner city London over the last couple of months, as you'd expect. People simply aren't out and about in the way that they were. And a lot of teenagers that might have been involved in this sort of activity during the lockdown have been taken out of the social circles that that they've usually been in, that have led them to some of this behaviour. They found themselves reconnecting with their family because they're stuck at home in lockdown. But equally importantly, they've been given an enormous amount of time to pause and reflect about what their lives were like and what has most value, which brings us back to some of the ideas that we were talking about already. So this, I think, brings together a number of the themes we've touched on already, that really we need to gain that kind of self-knowledge in order to be able to know how to live well.
I think, look, an very powerful point, this one, and John very well articulated. Very interesting, your comments about the connectivity of youth back to the family and away from negativity. I've read some of those points myself in various periodicals. It's been very interesting to observe that as well. Professor Gill, what would you add to that?
This is a kind of lateral point in a way, but in a way it's been like, what I found, it's been like stepping back in time during this period, that we've been living the life that was more like people lived in the 1950s or even back in the 19th century. Suddenly we find we are, all the people around are around us all the time. They're not whizzing across the world. And people have been walking everywhere. And suddenly we've gone back in time. So in a way, we've regained a kind of form of life that we had no longer any contact with. This, I don't know, this doesn't really fit in with self-knowledge, but it's just a lateral point that struck me, and how interesting that is. On self-knowledge, I think that's right. I just on the theory of that John mentioned about holding on to your roles, because I just like to dwell on the different aspects of that for a minute, because Cicero stresses that we have 4 roles. There is our general role as a human being, as someone who is potentially have the virtues. We have our own individual way of doing that. And we have to relate those to 2 other things as well. The social context in which we find ourselves, like these teenagers again back in their families, and also the project that you want to achieve in life. And I think, and Cicero stresses, the Stoic stress, that you've got to achieve consistency between all those 4 roles. And I think that's a very interesting and useful idea, that you have to kind of, to give harmony and cohesion to your life. You've got to make your sense of all those 4 elements fit together.
I think that that triggers quite a bit for me. I think on an individual basis, the considerations around different events as they translate through your life. We talked a little bit of it before. Victory for me didn't give me as much as, and that's probably more a reflection on me than anything else, as an athlete or a businessman. Victory wasn't as, it was a learning experience, but I learned more when I lost. So the pain or the loss or the misjudgment or the learning. So it's not that I didn't learn things when I won in life, I surely did, but I seem to learn a lot more when I lost. And that translates into self-knowledge and hopefully making better decisions around investing, for example, or what ventures I get involved in and so forth. But I think what comes with self-knowledge then is a greater sense of self-empowerment. And although as Stoics, we believe that the control is so minimal, but within the context of what you can control, with a greater sense of self-knowledge, you're in a greater position to be more self-empowered about the things that you see as controllable, the things that are important to you. And I really like that from the March 6th event, again, when Tim LeBron talked about Stoics being much more zestful and his assessment on that. And I thought that was very interesting, because Stoics And I think Professor Gill referenced before that, a little bit, Stoics have this reputation over the centuries or whatever of being a little bit dour, a bit negative, and it's just not true. And I think Tim summarized it very well in his overview on March 6th, in the sense that, Stoics, because they know what they can't control, they tend to focus on what they can control. It's within there that they find their purpose, and therefore their energy goes that way. Therefore, their zest quotient can potentially go up. And I think that's a really interesting point within developing self-awareness and what you can control, what you can't control, where your strengths are, what the things you want to work on. And I look at every time I pick up and look at a Seneca letter to Lucilius, or I'm reading the meditations, I am seeing those individuals reflect back to themselves where their weak spots are, what are the things they'd like to be continually aware of, their observations. And it is really a journey, a continual journey of self-awareness, which then translates into some sort of stronger sense of yourself and therefore empowerment. And I was reading this quote this week, which I think is extremely relevant from Marcus Aurelius, talking about, how the mind ultimately conducts itself. That's it. How the mind conducts itself, it all depends on that. And I think that's a very simple but very powerful representation of what your comments here, Chris and John. How the mind conducts itself, well, life, it all depends on that. And I think that's a really important point. And just very quickly, I think some of the translations you said there, John, and what will change and self-understanding business, coming to that very quickly. I can recall in the last years, how many times have I gone to New York for a 1-hour meeting, or gone to the Far East for 3 hours or 4 hours over 2 days? I mean, we've all learned to work remotely very efficiently. This way has to change. And yes. No one's saying that those meetings aren't important from time to time, but the way that they have been conducted previously, I think that is coming up for serious scrutiny. The way office space will work, the way central London will work. All of these things are going to evolve. Now, we may just fall back into default mechanism in the years ahead, maybe. But I do think that there's a huge opportunity for self-awareness and assessment and self-knowledge advancement. But I think that translates into business, small and large corporations. Anything you'd round out on there, John or Chris?
Well, I mean, just to pick up on some of the things you both said, I mean, I think really it's the process of slowing down that has taken place that has led to some of these benefits that you both mentioned, and that has created that space for people to be able to pause and reflect, to think about what has most value, to think about what direction they would like their lives to take. It's the slowing down that seems to have generated so many of these benefits, whether it be the reduction in climate pollution, or whether it just be having that space to reflect and think about what's most important.
I'd just like to echo what you said, Justin, about the need for organizations and governments and individuals to think very much about how they fly, when they travel, and to think about the implications of that. I think that the slowing down that John has referred to, that does give us this real opportunity now to think what we can do and what would really make a difference to our planet.
No, I think it's going to be a big topic going forward. Okay, so I'm going to ask Holly to come back into view. I want to thank both John and Chris for their great engagement this afternoon. We've covered examining judgments, thinking about value, focusing attention, understanding control, accepting reality, learning from challenges, and developing self-knowledge. And we've covered ground within the classic understanding of Stoicism and various influences, and we've brought in some of the major summary points, and also trying to reference it back to classic Stoic thought and references, and we've tried to bring that into a pragmatic day-to-day influence, whether it's on a personal basis, a family basis, a community basis, or in my case, in my profession as a businessman. So we're nicely ahead of our schedule. So I'm going to ask Holly, I've been receiving quite a few questions sent to me directly, But Holly, would you be able to, I know that you have a number of questions that have been sent to you within the forum. Would you be happy to read out a few of those questions, please?
Yes, of course. We have 9 questions, so we'll do our best to get through as many as we can. So the first one, I love the concept of experience followed by a gap before judgment. It seems that the judgment is ultimately the focus, but what about the gap? It seems that moment is key. How do we bring awareness to that gap to influence our judgments, to reinforce it?
Our virtue. Yeah, I mean, I'll happily respond to that. So that's from Eric. So thanks for that question. I mean, I think you're absolutely right. It's the gap that seems key. How do we create that? How do we create that gap? I mean, this is something that modern cognitive psychotherapists are very good at. I mean, they take these ideas from Stoicism, and they talk about cognitive distancing, where you try and create that space. So there's plenty of literature on this within the 20th century cognitive psychotherapy literature about how we might go about and do that. I'm not the most qualified person to go into more detail, but people have written on this at length.
Chris, any comment there?
Yeah, I think okay, so we have to try and make that gap, don't we? There's no technique here. It's a matter of trying to every time something comes up, you have to think, well, okay, hang on, what really matters here? What is really important here? And it's having that sense, not that I've got to do something now, but I have to do the right thing here. I have to do what is really worthwhile. So I think we have to kind of build in. We've got to build into our attention and our habits, as it were, the matter of trying to think, well, let's put it this way. Supposing I die tomorrow, okay, what would I have regretted not doing today? So it's having that sense of what would I do? It's the last day, because it's always potentially our last day. So it's trying to build in that sense of what matters. That will give the gap. Then that will give us full attention on what we might do.
Well, I think I have no doubt tomorrow won't be your last day, Chris. But if it was, I'm very glad that you took the time to be on this seminar.
Well, we never know, Justin. We never know.
Okay, Holly, next question, please.
What bit of advice would you give a young person between the age of 17 to 20 to help them specifically develop self-knowledge? Is this finding a talent, identifying unique values, or something else?
I'll go first very quickly on this one with my Stoic hat on, and just the way that I tend to, when I'm talking with younger people about approaching their career, for example. And I use my own daughters as the best example. They're very, very young, but we're already starting to experience this competitive set that they've got to be in this thing, doing that thing, doing it whenever, and doing 9 things at once on the weekend and everything. And we try to parlay into that scenario to a degree. But I'm continually in the discussion with my beautiful wife and saying to her that, look, at the end of the day, I just want them to follow their passion. But underneath that passion, let's make sure we have them, provide them the best chance to have a, we can call it Stoic value set, or whatever value set that's appropriate to be a positive, contributing, peaceful, kind human being. And whatever their passion is, let them find their passion. And if they can turn that into a career, then they'll have never worked a day in their life. And that's what we're very cognizant of, watching our children very carefully. And even when I'm talking to young people who come into the office and are interviewing for jobs, I try to explore them more as a person than as a young professional. Because what do you want to do? How do you map that to the outcome in your life? Will this job fulfill the way that you're thinking about broader? And often the responses are a little bit blank because they haven't had that opportunity to necessarily think wider. I'm always trying to encourage people to do what they love. And if they can monetize that into a career, it's absolutely, you're living the dream life. But, we do have to be realists. You do have to be pragmatic. Have I worked every moment of my life just doing what I wanted to do? No. Have I done things because I needed to do them, because I wanted that knowledge or experience? Yes. So I think it's about having a good life plan, or not in every detail, but the shapes of your life. And I referenced on the March 6th, I have 7 areas of my life that I pay attention to. And if things don't come into those areas, or they don't contribute to those areas, I don't participate. So I think that's the balance for a young person. Find your passion, have a broad shape of thought of where you'd like your life to go, and then map them together. And underpinning that, from my perspective, which is just, again, my perspective and my belief, strong Stoic values have been a strong foundation to proceed to deliver the first 2. John or Chris, please weigh in.
Yeah, I'd just add that, it's about finding a passion, or appreciating what talents or skills you might have. Again, identifying values, that's obviously very important, deciding what's important to you as an individual. But the other thing I'd stress is that this is a process that takes time. It's not as if it can just be done overnight. Everyone should expect to go through a few false starts. As someone who sort of teaches university students, something that I think is increasingly lost these days is the idea that university, in a sense, is or ought to be a space, an extended period of time where young people have the opportunity to go through that process of encountering lots of different things, which gives them an opportunity to see where their talents might lie, to meet lots of very different people from a variety of backgrounds often very different from their own, which can help them give a sense of what's most important and encounter different sets of values. I think, again, as a sort of slightly tangential point coming from my own perspective, the more that universities are just turned into vocational training colleges, where it's simply about jumping through lots of hoops in order to gain a vocational qualification, that's very useful for young people and for students in some respects. But equally important, I think, is having the space and the time to develop that self-knowledge, so that whatever they go on and do, they can do it with a sense of self-assurance that this is the right thing for them. I think that's really important.
Chris?
So there's 2 processes, aren't there? There's one is thinking about your life as a whole, thinking about what you want that life to achieve, of what you want that life to matter. And then there's also relating to what can I do now? A lot of young people are going to find themselves in situations where they have no longer options that they might have had under different economic circumstances. And they're going to have to say, well, okay, I still have this life, I still have this same dream, but the steps I can take towards the dream are different. So I think it's holding those 2 together and not losing either is the important thing. A sense of realism about what you can achieve now, but also the importance of the dream.
Very good. Very good. Thank you. Holly, back to you.
And just adding to that, somebody's asked, could you please recommend some books one could read in order to attain self-knowledge?
Okay, why don't we can we'll put something out on the various sites. We'll collectively we'll put some things out there. We'll put some suggested readings out there. It's a big subject, and it's a very personal subject as well. So again, from the foundation, we'll put it out there from a Stoic perspective, and we hope that helps. But we look forward to everyone. The great thing about Stoicism, it's you are accountable to yourself as much as interacting with the world. But yes, we'll put some things out there for sure.
A question from Jonathan, who wants to ask Justin. He says, I am seeing some wonderful examples of Stoicism in my life at the moment, and in particularly with how businesses are treating their people. Do you think this will continue once we get back to a new normal and the business world potentially gets tougher as we enter a recession?
Yeah, I think this is a complicated point, this one. the sentiments we hope that remain, and how people, you know, and businesses and leaders will interact with their teams and the people that work for them, that give their best every day, and also how that translates into interacting with customers and business and entities being successful. Sadly, I think the next 6 to 12 months in the UK is going to be pretty terrible. I think the recession and the impact on business is catastrophic. And I think businesses will do their best to work through that. And it kind of pivots a little bit here. I think good leaders will try to do everything to maintain as many employees and teams and the direction of the business pre-COVID. They will try to do that. Businesses that have been so dramatically affected will have to react to make those businesses survive. And we're kind of taking a high level thought here. If the business doesn't survive, then there are no employees. So it's somewhat circular here. So I personally believe that the recessional environment and unemployment, and we've seen the statistics in the United States short term, that you've got 20 million people now unemployed in the United States, the highest on record. And I think what will translate in the UK, unknown looking into a crystal ball, but I do think it's going to be dramatic, and it's going to be heavily recessional, and there is going to be a lot of potential unemployment coming as businesses try to survive. And therefore they will carry teams and employees through along that journey. That is my personal opinion. It's going to be difficult. And I think in terms of conduct within businesses, how they operate, we referenced the travel, for example, remote working, you know, acts of kindness and what the business stands for. I think all those good things will translate into the business community going forward, and I think they will be sustainable, hopefully. But there is a harsh economic reality that is going to play out over the next 6-12 months, which is going to be very difficult for a lot of people, I think.
Okay, and the next question, from a Stoic point of view, what is the silver lining of COVID-19? What positive behaviours at the global scale might come out of this experience?
John, would you like to go first on that?
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, something that Chris mentioned earlier is the environmental benefits in terms of polluting gases. I mean, air pollution in London has dropped. At our event in London in March, Tom, who spoke about Stoicism and sustainability, showed one of these very graphic graphs with the exponential increase in CO2 emissions. And then there's suddenly a cliff drop. And the graph says, if we're going to meet the kind of Paris climate targets or whatever, we need this cliff drop in emissions. And no one can see how that could possibly happen. Well, irony of ironies, a month later, it's happened. I mean, I can't imagine anything else that could have led to such a dramatic reduction in CO2 emissions as this crisis has. Now, obviously, things are going to have to go back to normal to some extent. We'll all see how, but I mean, I can't imagine air travel, for instance, going back up to the levels that it was before, in part because a number of airlines may well not survive. So there may well be changes to habits that will significantly improve the environment in particular. And as many people have commented, the environmental crisis is arguably a much more dangerous existential threat than the virus ever was. So I think that could be a real silver lining that could come out of this, and one that we shouldn't underestimate. This could turn out to be the wake-up call that will guarantee our longer-term survival.
Chris?
We've mentioned already in the discussion, we've mentioned lots of silver linings, haven't we? We've mentioned having that everyone's got time to reflect. They've got to think about their lives. Organizations and governments have had time to reflect and think about what matters. People have started behaving in a much more kind, generous, and thoughtful way to their neighbours, their families, and friends. So I think there have actually been many silver linings as well. I certainly think the environmental one is a very, very big one. And I think it really does give a huge opportunity to think about how we should be conducting ourselves. I mean, do we still imagine that we should be planning to build a second runway at Heathrow, for instance? That seems to me incredible that should now be even thought about.
I think that's an excellent summary from both of you. I would just add one small aspect to that, is that even with the time, and see what prevails over the next periods, next weeks, moving, potentially releasing. So I just continue to encourage everyone on the call, and part of the foundation is that you really have a great look within yourself. If you haven't taken the time to reflect, I'm sure all of us have, we've been forced to, but there's still a great opportunity to look at this period. And with some of my peers, we've been having discussions around, this is a reboot, reevaluation, resetting, recalibration, to look into the future and say to yourself, this is the way I'd like to make some adjustments. And you've got the time to really formulate that. And will we fall back to other old habits? Possibly. But I do think that the business community will change. It will change, and there will be significant changes based on capacity coming out of certain sectors, as referenced in the airlines as a potential segment that really is going to change dramatically, but all areas. And I think that in some ways, that is the silver lining. What does your business do? Can it sustain something like this? And where do you move going forward, both strategically and tactically? And I think that also translates onto an individual basis as well. Okay, Holly, next.
We all know works from Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, and Epictetus are the core of Stoicism as we know it. Is Cicero somewhat neglected in this matter?
I'll leave that to my esteemed colleagues to address that point. John.
Yeah, I mean, I'll perhaps touch on that first. So the three Roman Stoics are the ones that most popular readers will read today. They're all very engaging writers in very different ways. They've all got their own styles, but they're all really engaging and accessible, and they're all card-carrying Stoics. So I think that's one of the reasons why they tend to be they tend to get the most attention. But Cicero is absolutely fundamental as a source for knowing about the more technical details of Stoicism. So there's a sense in which he's the person to read in your next step if you want to explore about Stoicism further. So the early Stoics who were active in Athens, who found the whole thing, all of their works are lost. And Cicero's works, written in the 1st century BC, are the earliest extended works that we've got that report Stoic ideas. And he's a lot more technical than the other three. The other three are very rhetorical in their own ways. They're trying to persuade us. They're trying to get those ideas over to us. Whereas Cicero is doing the more sort of careful, forensic, more academic, if you like, discussion of the ideas. So it's not the sort of thing that's going to inspire you in quite the same way, but it's going to give you the details. It's going to give you the arguments. So I'd strongly recommend Cicero's philosophical works to people if they've read their Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius and are looking for the next thing to read.
Chris, please.
Sorry, I missed the question. What was the question? Was it who tends to get neglected?
Cicero.
Oh, Cicero. Okay. Yes. No. I agree. I thought it was Zeno for a minute. But Zeno is mostly lost. No, Cicero is wonderful, and I think a work that many people would really benefit from is his On Duties, because it's very accessible and it's very rich, and it deals with just the sort of decisions we're all trying to make all the time and all the sort of problems we have all the time. So I think Cicero's On Duties is, a book absolutely everyone should have at their bedside, or at least somewhere to hand anyway.
Perhaps add on that. I mean, as Chris knows all too well, that book On Duties, Cicero wrote for his son as a work of life guidance to give a young person instruction as they start off in adult life. So highly relevant. The other book by well, a couple of other books by Cicero, perhaps worth mentioning. One of them, the Tusculan Disputations, which is all about managing emotions, which is highly relevant to some of the themes we've been talking about today. And then the third one I'd mention is On Ends, or On Moral Ends, the De Finibus, which gives you the nuts and bolts. It gives you the arguments that stand behind Stoic ethics, arguments about value, about living according to nature, all of those sorts of things. So that's a really a good thing that people might want to dip into as well.
Okay, next question. How can we recreate a modern day marketplace step to generate discussion, debate, awareness favoured by the ancient Stoics?
I would say I'm looking forward to hearing from John and Chris on this, but I think that is one of the goals for the foundation, is that we provide a venue on a consistent basis. And today, whether it's live with our seminars and those types of events that continually evolve, working through the business community, or a consistent webinar or engagement program through the foundation, that people could organize and rally around periods on a weekly, monthly basis, with or without us as founders or contributors or partners and things, that they can come and talk about the things that they would like to discuss, debate, and scrutinize within their own worlds, and ask other fellow aspiring Stoics or other thought processes to come in and debate. And I think that's a real thing, that if we could have a platform that comes alive on a consistent basis on our website or through our social channels, I think it's a good takeaway from this, that we could try and set that up. And again, it doesn't have to be particularly formal. We don't need to think, we could set up a format where that step could be created, where Stoics can meet on a fairly regular basis, and we can open up this type of conversation. And I think that's a good call out from today, that I'm certainly taking away in a visual sense and a virtual sense. John?
Yes, I mean, I think you explained that very well. I mean, I think that's part of your vision, part of our vision for the foundation, that we can create that space. Of course, for Chris and I, who've been working on modern Stoicism, we've done some work in that direction too. So the blog we have on modernstoicism.com has been a space where lots of people have written pieces. There's lots of lively conversation there. And there's a connected Facebook group that has lots of conversation as well, that our collaborator Donald Robertson runs. So these spaces are slowly emerging. Obviously, Facebook can be a bit, wild at times. So the idea of having a dedicated online social space that the foundation could provide, which could be a much more focused and serious space for conversation, I think would be something really valuable.
And Chris, any comment there?
Well, just to say again, just to repeat John, really, that yes, have a look at the Modern Stoicism home of Stoicon and Stoic Week site. That has a great deal already, but we're with it has the blog Stoicism Today, a big Facebook group. And there's another magazine called The Stoic Gym, which also occurs regularly. And yes, I think that we want to have as many contexts of discussion as possible. I think, and it's wonderful that the Aurelius Foundation is creating other spaces. So I think we want as many opportunities as we can for people to think about Stoicism and how to put it into practice, and to do it whatever the circumstances that are going on, whatever pandemics or economic crises or whatever, that this should be, we should have these fora. So
yeah, I think, Chris, I'd echo that. You said something there I think it's very fair, whether it's pandemic or other economic traumas or other things that are going positive or negative. It's very interesting. A number of people who came to the event in London were invited, who came across the opportunity, and they were going through a couple of challenges on their professional front. And they found that the day on March the 6th 6 was really powerful for them to take grip. They didn't go to the event and all of a sudden the burning bush is there, but it did allow them to reflect and go within themselves and reposition their approach into organizing their resources and their time to work through what they were doing. And I was very touched by a couple of people that reached out on a private basis and said, the Stoic mindset really did allow me to step back and take perspective. And I think that's what we're trying to, it's one of the goals that we'd love to achieve. Okay, Holly, is there one more or two more? I've got a couple here. I won't do them all, but have you have one more? Or how close are you, Holly?
Yeah, we've got one more around connecting to Stoicism at university. This is from Eric. My struggle is with the US educational design. Our course and degree design is about knowing stuff, art, sociology, agriculture, etc., but very little about knowing the self. How can a student be truly educated if we have not directed them towards wisdom via self-knowledge? My students that have wrestled with the Stoic thinkers have flourished as they have consciously and actively considered their place in the world. How can we better operationalize this in the curriculum for students?
Well, I'll go over to John. Please start then. Please.
I'm happy to. So that picks up on something I was saying earlier about university ideally being a space where people have time to reflect. I mean, I was teaching some of this material with students the year before last, and by complete coincidence, our Stoic Week experiment coincided with the very first week of term, in which I was going to be teaching the students material for Stoic ethics and Marcus Aurelius in particular. And so I asked the students to follow Stoic Week. The first thing you do before we actually study any of the content of the course is follow Stoic Week. And I made this a requirement. So in our technical language, it was a formative assessment. They had to do it, and they had to write a reflective piece on their experience of following Stoic Week. Although it wasn't graded, so there was no mark towards their final degree. There no right or wrong answers. They just had to go through that process of reflection. And I was absolutely stunned by the quality and the depth of the pieces that these students wrote. They really engaged with it in a really profound way and commented on really significant issues in their own lives and how it helped them, which I thought was really valuable. Now, that was a one-off small group of students happy to be studying Stoicism. So how do you translate that more widely? Well, the thing that I have in the back of my mind that I would like to see going forwards, and I've had this discussion with a number of people in different universities, is that these days there's a huge discussion of the mental health crisis among students. Most universities spend a lot of money these days on health and well-being services for students, offering all sorts of services to help them with mental health issues. If we could offer some kind of Stoic-based program to those welfare services that would be available for all students, not necessarily philosophy students, let alone people that happen to be studying Stoicism, then we could offer some of this guidance and pick up on some of the ideas we've been talking about today. And universities would be able to then provide this to all their students. I think that could be a really interesting way to perhaps get some of this material out to a much wider audience.
I think that's a terrific suggestion. I think that Eric's point is a really interesting one, isn't it? That on the one hand, we have organizations saying, oh, we're really worried about mental health. On the other hand, we have organizations stuffing their students full of stuff, of expecting ridiculous amounts of content. So it's a matter for each of us, whether we're a teacher, a student, someone who has been a teacher, whatever we're involved in, it's a way of trying to get organizations and get individuals to use the things they are doing in a thoughtful and reflective way. That's the trick. I think if we can develop a resource or set something as a pre-module. That's a wonderful idea. But it's somehow it's it's what E.M. Forster said. Only connect. If we only connect the things that matter and the things we do and the little things we do, and it's that connection that we have to, joining up the dots, that's what we have to try and work on, all of us, I think.
Yeah, I think they're both very well summarized. And I think for full disclosure, Eric, thank you for the question. Eric is an academic and administrator at Illinois State University. So he's joining the webinar from over there, which we really appreciate greatly. And the foundation is keen to go to Illinois State University and some other universities in the region there and present an agenda that can provide those students, whether they're, as you say, Chris, in philosophy or in the arts, but across the business schools as well, and present this line of thinking that, to be a successful businessman doesn't mean you need to rape and pillage the planet and destroy it along the way. That's not what it's about. There is a way to be successful in business and in an ethical and moral manner and contribute to the greater good in many ways as possible, and have a Stoic underpinning of it. So Eric, we're looking forward to coming to see you, working with your students. I know we've been disrupted by the current circumstances, but we look forward to getting that back on, or doing something like this even for your student body as well. And there's some other universities in the United States that are very keen for the foundation to be engaged as well in something similar. I'm looking at a couple of chat comments here from Stephanie Huankas, and it's very interesting about your comments, Stephanie, around recommendations of literature and creating activities and projects and centered on Stoicism. I couldn't agree more, and how they tie that in. I like your comment here as well about implement Stoicism workshops and seminars at schools and universities. I think that's terrific, and we're on a mission to do that. We are on a mission for the next years to drive through our influence, Stoic thought and philosophy and awareness. And those that hear the message, it's not for everyone. And we're not trying to push it on anyone. We just want to provide an opportunity of understanding and awareness. So we're almost there. It's been a great session. We could go on. There's more questions that Holly has. I've got a bunch of questions here that have been sent to me on email and text and what have you, but I'm only going to select one, which I'm going to leave to Chris and to John to have a shot at. It's not easy. It's not easy, but I'm going to try and put it up there with John if you want to start. And the question is from someone in the United States that says, if Marcus Aurelius was the current president of the United States or the current prime minister of Great Britain, how would he have acted with COVID-19 disruption? That's a tough question. John, do you have any thoughts around that?
Yeah, that is a tough question. And there's often discussion about, to what extent was Marcus the philosopher when he was the emperor? How much did his philosophy inform his actions as emperor? That's a very hard one to judge. I mean, what would he have done? He would have tried to take the big, take in the big picture. He would have tried to think long term. He would have tried to act for the benefit of everybody rather than just interested parties. I mean, those look like, hopefully they would have been the guiding principles. I'm not going to make any comment about whether the US or UK governments have or haven't done any of those things, but those look like good Stoic guiding principles for dealing with this sort of situation.
And Chris?
I think as far as we can tell, Marcus Aurelius was consistent with his philosophy and his politics. That he was sincere and effective. I think he would have thought his response through. I think it's clear from the way he acted as a general in the German campaign, that he was both quick when you needed to be, that he took decisive action, and also that he had consistency and a kind of calm rationality And I think he would have informed himself about the science. I think he would have acted in line with that. But above all, a calm consistency and rationality of judgment, which we could have done with in both our countries.
Very good. Eric Alvar has said to all of us, or Marcus would have used premeditatio malorum, of course, and I think that's well said. Terrific. Okay, look, let's end it there. I want to thank John as always and Chris as always for their outstanding preparation and contributions from their vast experience and knowledge in the field. I always take as much from them that they're naturally giving in their commentary, but also I take a lot from applying it back to my own understandings. I think that they join really well together. So I really appreciate it as always. On behalf of the Foundation founders, with Holly, Pat Cash, Guy Hume, Joe Easton, who's in Dallas listening, John, of course, and my wife, Natalia, we're very grateful for everyone participating this afternoon. We've had an excellent participation. We've got a number of events that are coming out. We're really excited about those events. We will continue to update everyone accordingly, and we will look to bring in things of ideas around how we continue to invest in the foundation. But we're young, we're learning, and we're going to do this in a very methodical way. So without further ado, let's end it there. We wish you and your family to keep safe, follow the rules, and this will soon pass at some stage when it's supposed to pass. So we wish everyone all the very best, and thank you again, Holly, John, and Christopher. Everyone take care.